So that was step 2. Now we're on to step 3. Step 3 is going to be a long step, so I'll probably divide it into multiple videos. I'll do one video for calculating all of the sum of squares, I'll do another video for all of the mean squares, and then a video for calculating the f's. So for step 3, where I'm going to start is calculating the sum of squares total. And that is equal to the sum of x squared minus g squared divided by big N. And so these values come from the question itself. So if you recall, we've got the sum of x squared, we've got big G, and we've got big N already calculated out for us. So we've got 31,836 minus 1440 squared divided by 80. So 3,100,836 minus 1440 squared is a big number, 2,073,600 divided by 80. 31,836 minus, so I'm going to divide that by 80. That's 25,920, which is equal to 5,916. So that's my sum of squares total. And I'm going to start highlighting these pieces too. Not that color. I'll do green right now. Okay, so that's going to go right here. Next, I'm going to calculate sum of squares within. And the sum of squares within is equal to the sum of squares from each of those 4 cells, which was given to us in this question. So if you come back here to this first page, we're going to add 1540 plus 1270 plus 1320 plus 1266. So we are going to take the sum of squares in each cell. And so that's 1540 plus 1270 plus 1320 plus 1266. And that equals 5,396. And so that number is going to come right up there. The next one that makes the most sense to calculate is the between. And the way that we're going to calculate the between, well, we have 2 options. The simplest is to take the sum of squares total minus the sum of squares within, and that'll give us our sum of squares between. But I will show you 2 different ways to calculate that, just so that we have it demoed in both ways. Let's do the easy way first. So sum of squares total equals sum of squares between plus sum of squares within. So to rearrange this, we'll subtract sum of squares within from each side, and what we will end up with is sum of squares between equals the sum of squares total minus the sum of squares within. And what that is 5,916 minus 5,396. And that equals 520. The alternative, so or, You don't have to do it both ways, but there is another. The alternative is to use a different formula. And that formula is sum of squares between equals t squared, the sum of t squared divided by lowercase n minus g squared divided by uppercase n. And so this t and this n come from each of those original cells. So we'll take, for example, we'll take 440, square it, divide by 20. And we'll do that for each of these groups. We'll add those together, and then we'll subtract this g squared divided by n. So what that is it is 440 squared divided by 20 plus 300 squared divided by 20 plus 360 squared divided by 20 plus 340 squared divided by 20, subtract, this is g squared, 1440 squared divided by 80. So I'm gonna shift over here just to give myself some more writing room. 440 squared is 193,600, so 193,600 divided by 20 plus, and I'll just fill in the remainder. So right here, this is 300 squared goes here, 360 squared goes here, then 340 squared goes right here. Subtract, and we already calculated this one out before when we were calculating SS total. So this, I haven't calculated out, but I will. And then this one I already calculated earlier. And so if you go through, you add these three together, you subtract this, you get 520, which is what we got before. And now, so each of these is divided by 20 because there's 20 participants in each of these cells. And here we're dividing by 80 because that's what this big N is, 20 plus 20 plus 20 plus 20. So that gets us our sum of squares between in an alternate format. The next that I'm going to try, that I'm going to do is this sum of squares weight, then I'll do hunger, and then I'll do the interaction. So sum of squares weight equals the sum of t squared for the rows divided by the n that is associated with the rows, subtract g squared divided by n. And so those row totals are over here. So that row total 740 is 440 plus 300. So both of the cells that are associated with the normal weight contribute to this. And the n here is 40. And down here, because you have 20 plus 20 is 40. So the n for the row is 40. So we've got 740 squared divided by 40 plus 700 squared divided by 40 plus 1440 squared divided by 80. And so that is 547,600 divided by 40 plus 49, or 490,000 divided by 40. Subtract, and I'm just, for simplicity's sake, I'm going to take this number because it's 1440 squared divided by 80 is this. So I'm just going to pull that down because these videos are already getting long. So if you do 547,600 divided by 40, you get 13,690 plus 12,250, subtract 25,920, and that equals 20. Those big numbers, and then we get a 20. Feels kind of strange, doesn't it? So that sum of squares weight goes here. We're going to do the same for sum of squares hunger. But instead of using the row totals, we're using the column totals. So we'll use 780 and 660. And again, those ends are 40 because 20 plus 20 is 40, and then 20 plus 20 is 40. So what we'll have here is the sum of t squared column divided by n column. And that sum is actually for all of this. Sorry, a bit messy. I'll probably clean that up before I scan it. G squared divided by big N. So that t column was 780 squared divided by 40 plus 660 squared divided by 40 minus 1440 squared divided by 80. And so that works out to and I'm again just going to put this 25, 920. And here we're on page 4. I'm going to have to move to page 5 as best as I am able. Trying to make sure that I'm somewhat straight on this. This will be page 5. And so this is SS Hunger continued. So 608, 400 divided by 40. That's 1510 plus and that is equal to 180. So we're going to take that 180 and we're going to plug it in over here to our table. Okay? And the last that we need to calculate is that interaction. The weight by hunger. The way we calculate that is that the sum of squares between subtract the sum of squares of weight, subtract the sum of squares of hunger. Because the sum of squares between is equal to the sum of squares weight plus the sum of squares hunger plus the sum of squares of the interaction. So that sum of squares between was 520. Sum of squares for weight was 20. And the sum of squares for hunger was 180. And so what that works out to is 320. And so that's the last number that we need in this sum of squares column. It's right here. And so this video is already 15 minutes long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this video. In the next section, the next video, I'll calculate this mean square, and then I'll have a video for calculating your F, and that will conclude step 3.